Have you ever felt that someone, somewhere, made a decision about you long before you ever met? Not a random decision. Not a careless thought. A decision so deep that it quietly shaped both of your lives without either of you realizing it. Imagine this for a moment. There is a person living their ordinary life. They wake up every morning, drink their coffee, go to work, smile at strangers, laugh with friends, and carry invisible scars no one else notices. To everyone around them, they seem perfectly normal. But hidden inside their heart is a promise. A promise they have never spoken out loud. A promise they made years ago. To someone they had never even met. That someone is you. It sounds impossible. Yet sometimes life has a strange way of connecting people before their paths ever cross. Long before your names become familiar. Long before your eyes meet. Long before your hands touch. A choice has already been made. Your soulmate has already decided what kind of love they would protect. What kind of heart they would never betray. And what kind of future they would spend their entire life searching for. They didn't know your face. They didn't know your voice. But somehow, deep inside, they already knew you existed. Not by name. Not by appearance. But by feeling. Every difficult moment they survived was preparing them for someone they believed was still out there. Every disappointment became another reminder not to settle. Every heartbreak whispered the same sentence. Keep waiting. People laughed at them. Friends said they were too picky. Family members asked why they were still single. Some even told them that perfect love doesn't exist. Maybe they smiled. Maybe they nodded politely. But inside, they never changed their mind. Because something inside them kept saying, the right person is still coming. They couldn't explain why. Logic couldn't explain it. Their friends certainly couldn't explain it. But hope doesn't always need proof. Sometimes, hope simply knows. While everyone else rushed into relationships that looked perfect from the outside, your soulmate quietly chose patience. They watched people fall in love quickly, only to watch those same people fall apart months later. They saw promises broken, trust disappear, dreams collapse. And every single time, instead of lowering their standards, they raised their faith. Not faith in fairy tales. Faith that somewhere, someone was searching for them just as desperately. They didn't know that at the exact same time, you were living your own story. Maybe you were healing from disappointment. Maybe you were learning painful lessons. Maybe you had already started believing that love wasn't meant for you. There were nights when you questioned everything. You wondered why people always left. Why your kindness wasn't enough. Why your heart kept breaking while everyone else seemed happy. You didn't know it then. But every tear was quietly leading you towards someone who refused to stop believing in you. even before they knew your name. The universe has strange timing. Sometimes two people spend years growing separately, only because neither one is ready yet. One learns patience. The other learns forgiveness. One learns courage. The other learns trust. And when both hearts finally become strong enough, life begins moving them closer together. Not all at once. Just little by little. A delayed flight. A new job. A random invitation. A wrong turn. A conversation that almost never happened. Tiny moments. Invisible decisions. Each one quietly guiding two strangers toward the same destination. Most people call these coincidences. But what if they aren't? What if every unexpected moment was simply another step towards someone who had already chosen you long ago? Someone who refused to give up, even when everyone else told them to. Your soulmate never settled. Not because they were waiting for perfection. Because they were waiting for peace. The kind of peace that only appears when two hearts finally recognize each other. They imagined conversations with someone who truly understood silence. They dreamed about laughing over ordinary moments. Growing old together. Building a home filled with kindness instead of fear. Creating a love that survived difficult seasons. Not because life became easier, but because neither person ever stopped choosing the other. Without realizing it, they were imagining you. Not your face. Not your voice. Your soul. And every single day, that invisible promise grew stronger. One day, without telling anyone, your soulmate looked up at the sky and whispered something almost no one knows. I don't know where you are, but I'll wait. That quiet promise changed everything. Because from that moment forward, every choice they made carried one question. Will this bring me closer to the person I'm meant to spend forever with? Little did they know. The answer was already beginning to unfold. Some promises are never spoken out loud. They are carried quietly, hidden behind ordinary smiles, protected inside a heart that refuses to stop believing. Your soulmate carried that promise every single day. No one knew. Not their closest friends. Not their family. Not even the people who believed they knew them best. Because some dreams are too precious to explain. Whenever someone asked, "So, when are you finally going to settle down?" they would simply smile. Whenever it feels right. It sounded like a simple answer. But inside, those words carried years of waiting. Years of trusting something invisible. Years of believing that real love should never feel forced. People misunderstood them. Some called them unrealistic. Others said they were wasting time. A few even warned them. If you keep waiting, you'll end up alone. For a brief moment, those words hurt. Late at night, they wondered if everyone else was right. Maybe they should lower their standards. Maybe love wasn't supposed to feel peaceful. Maybe they expected too much. For the first time, doubt quietly entered their heart. And that's when someone unexpected appeared. This person seemed perfect, kind, successful, confident. Everything looked right on paper. Friends were excited. Family approved immediately. Even strangers said, "You two look amazing together." It felt like life was finally giving them the answer everyone had been waiting for. So, they decided to try. They gave this relationship a real chance. They laughed together, shared dinners, made plans, created memories. From the outside, everything looked beautiful. But every single night, when silence filled the room, something inside whispered, "This isn't forever." There was no huge fight. No dramatic betrayal. Nothing obvious. Just a quiet feeling. Like trying to wear shoes that almost fit, but never truly do. Every conversation felt slightly incomplete. Every hug felt just a little too empty. Every goodbye lasted a little too easily. Your soulmate tried to ignore that feeling. They blamed themselves. Maybe this is what adult love feels like. Maybe movies made my expectations unrealistic. Maybe peace doesn't exist. Weeks became months. Months became even longer. Yet the quiet voice inside never disappeared. One rainy evening, they were driving home after another perfectly normal date. The streets were almost empty. Raindrops covered the windshield. The radio played softly in the background. And suddenly, without warning, they pulled the car over. Not because something happened outside. Because something happened inside. For the first time, they admitted the truth. I don't want a relationship that only looks right. I want one that feels like home. Tears slowly rolled down their face. Not because someone had hurt them. Because they realized they were about to betray themselves. That night, they made the hardest decision of their life. They walked away. Everyone thought they were making a mistake. Friends couldn't understand. Family questioned everything. People whispered, "They'll regret this forever." But your soulmate felt something completely different. Relief. The kind of relief that only comes after choosing honesty over comfort. They were alone again. But this time, their heart felt lighter. Because they had protected the promise they once made to someone they still hadn't met. You. Meanwhile, without knowing any of this, you were fighting your own battles. Life hadn't been easy for you either. There were moments when you smiled in public, only to cry in private. Moments when you convinced yourself that maybe love was meant for other people. You watched friends get engaged. Watched wedding photos appear everywhere. Watched everyone move forward. While you quietly wondered, when will it be my turn? Some nights, you almost gave up. You told yourself, I'm tired of hoping. But deep inside, a tiny part of your heart refused to disappear. It kept whispering, don't stop yet. You had no idea. At that exact same moment, someone else was saying the very same words. Hundreds of miles away. Two hearts. Separated by distance. Connected by hope. Neither one knew the other's name. Yet both made the exact same decision. To keep believing. Life has an incredible way of protecting people from meeting too early. If your paths had crossed years before, perhaps one of you would have walked away. Perhaps fear would have won. Perhaps timing would have ruined everything. So life waited. Not to punish you. To prepare you. Every disappointment taught compassion. Every goodbye taught gratitude. Every lonely season taught patience. Neither of you realized it then. But your hearts were becoming capable of loving in a completely different way. Not with excitement alone, but with commitment. Not with fantasy, but with understanding. Then, one ordinary morning, everything quietly began to change. Your soulmate woke up with an unexplainable feeling. Nothing looked different. The same bedroom. The same routine. The same morning sunlight. Yet somehow, the world felt lighter. As if something invisible had shifted overnight. They couldn't explain it. But for the first time in years, waiting no longer felt painful. Instead, it felt close. Very close. Almost like standing outside a door. Knowing someone on the other side is about to knock. Far away. You experienced something similar. You smiled for no reason. You felt hopeful without knowing why. You caught yourself imagining a future again. A future you had almost stopped believing in. Neither of you understood it. But somewhere, the distance between your two stories had already begun to disappear. The promise made years ago, the one nobody ever knew about, was quietly leading both of you toward the moment that would change everything forever. And neither of you had any idea that your first meeting was much closer than either of you could imagine. Have you ever noticed how the biggest moments in life rarely announce themselves? They don't arrive with dramatic music. They don't send a warning. They simply appear. Looking like an ordinary day. The morning your lives began moving toward each other. Neither of you expected anything unusual. Your soulmate woke up thinking it would be another normal Tuesday. The alarm rang. Coffee was made. Messages were answered. Plans for the day seemed exactly the same as every other week. But life had quietly rewritten the schedule. A meeting was cancelled. A different route was taken. A 5-minute delay changed the entire afternoon. At first, it felt like an inconvenience. They sighed. Why does everything have to change at the last minute? Little did they know. That small change was protecting a moment that had been years in the making. Across the city, you were experiencing your own unexpected changes. You almost stayed home. You almost said no. You almost postponed your plans. Something inside you wanted to avoid the day completely. Maybe you felt tired. Maybe life had been overwhelming. Maybe your heart simply wanted another quiet afternoon. But for reasons you couldn't explain, you decided to go anyway. Looking back, that decision would become one of the most important choices of your life. Because destiny doesn't always ask for huge acts of courage. Sometimes, it only asks you not to give up on an ordinary day. Neither of you knew how close you had come to missing each other forever. A few different choices. A few extra minutes. A single wrong turn. And your stories might have continued separately. Instead, life gently guided both of you to the same place. Not with magic. Not with coincidence alone. But through hundreds of tiny moments that had been quietly unfolding for years. When your soulmate arrived, nothing seemed unusual. People walked past. Cars moved through the streets. Conversations filled the air. The world continued exactly as it always had. Then, for just a second, everything seemed to slow down. Not because time actually stopped. Because attention did. Somewhere nearby, someone laughed. A familiar warmth filled the air. Your soulmate looked up without thinking. And for one brief moment, their eyes met yours. It wasn't like the movies. There were no fireworks. No dramatic music. No instant declarations of love. Just a feeling. A strange, unexpected feeling. As though meeting you wasn't entirely new. Almost like remembering someone instead of discovering them. You felt it too. You couldn't explain why. You had never met this person before. Yet your heart became strangely calm. Not excited. Not nervous. Peaceful. A kind of peace that made no logical sense. Neither of you spoke. The moment passed. People continued walking. Life kept moving. And within seconds, you disappeared into different directions. That was it. Or so it seemed. The rest of the day felt different. Your soulmate couldn't focus. Every task seemed strangely unimportant. Again and again, their mind returned to that brief moment. Why did that feel so familiar? They couldn't remember your face perfectly, but they couldn't forget the feeling. Meanwhile, you experienced exactly the same thing. You tried distracting yourself. You answered calls, finished your responsibilities, smiled through conversations. Yet deep inside, something had changed. Not because you believed in love at first sight, but because your heart recognized something your mind couldn't explain. That evening, your soulmate sat quietly by the window, watching the sunset disappear beyond the horizon. For the first time in years, they smiled without forcing it. Not because they had found love, because hope suddenly felt real again. Elsewhere, you looked up at the same evening sky. Without realizing it, both of you whispered almost identical thoughts. I wonder who they were. Neither of you knew. But the promise made years ago, the one that had survived loneliness, heartbreak, distance, and time, had finally begun to reveal itself. This wasn't the ending of your search. It was only the beginning. Because life wasn't finished bringing you together. That first glance wasn't meant to answer every question. It was meant to awaken something both of you had almost forgotten. Faith. The kind of faith that quietly says, keep going. You are closer than you think. Over the next few days, neither of you expected another meeting. You assumed it had been nothing more than a passing moment. Just another stranger in a busy world. But destiny has a habit of returning. Especially when two hearts have already chosen each other long before they knew each other's names. Some meetings happen by chance. The next one would happen for a reason. And when it did, neither of you would ever see life the same way again. To be continued in Part 4.